to remind you that we offer simultaneous translation services in English and Turkish. You can choose the relevant channel with the interpretation button below. Değerli katılımcılar, Uluslararası Medya ve Toplum Sempozyumumuzun son keynote oturumuna hoş geldiniz. Sempozyumumuzda İngilizce ve Türkçe simultane tercüme hizmeti sunuyoruz. Aşağıda bulunan Interpretation butonundan ilgili kanalı seçerek tercihte bulunabilirsiniz. I would like to invite Professor Helen Armstrong from North Carolina State University to share her keynote presentation titled Artificial Intelligence as a Design Material. Helen Armstrong views design from across the spectrum of a practicing designer, a college professor, and a published author. She is an associate professor of graphics design at North Carolina State University. In addition to teaching, Armstrong works as principal of her company, Strong Design. Her work has been recognized by Print and How magazine and highlighted in numerous design publications. She currently serves on the editorial board of Design and Culture and is a past co-chair of AGA Design Educators Community Steering Committee. Armstrong authored Graphic Design Theory, Readings from the Field, and co-authored Participate, Designing with User-Generated Content. Her new book, Digital Design, explores works by both designers and programmers, examining the two traits of discourse, design and computation, that have rapidly merged to define contemporary graphic design. As you can realize, just like yesterday's keynote speaker, Ellen Lupton, we literally grew up with her books during our communication design education. Professor Armstrong, I leave the floor to you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, just quick check. Can everyone see my presentation? Okay, great.
Yes, great.
All right, wonderful. Well, I'm really honored to be here today. Thank you so much for asking me to speak. I am a professor of graphic and experience design at North Carolina State in the US. This is my website and email, so if anyone is interested in connecting after the talk, I would be happy to connect and talk about the content more. Okay, so I am here today to talk about artificial intelligence as a design material. Before I really get into the impact of artificial intelligence on design, though, I need to take a few minutes just to unpack what I mean by artificial intelligence. So what I mean by artificial intelligence is machine learning. Machine learning is the most common form of artificial intelligence that we interact with today. Machine learning, in essence, is a set of algorithms that analyze structured and unstructured data, learn from the patterns it detects, and then makes predictions. So those predictions might be, for example, whether or not an email is spam, whether or not the author of a body of text is feeling happy or angry. The prediction might be the identity of a face. We interact with machine learning throughout our days currently. So examples of that might be if you order a Lyft or an Uber, the little estimated time of arrival, that's machine learning in action. I mentioned spam filters, recommendation systems that recommend a new book, a new streaming video, a product. We see machine learning, we experience machine learning when we converse with chatbots or virtual agents. Image recognition. So when one image is recognized and then another similar image is suggested. Search patterns. So analyzing search patterns so that when you search for something, more relevant results appear from you. So facial recognition. So we interact with machine learning quite a bit in our daily lives today. We can also understand machine learning by contrasting it with traditional programming. So with traditional programming, we input commands, in essence, glorified instructions. So instructions to the computer. But instead of inputting commands, as in traditional programming, with machine learning, we actually input data. And I'll give you an example of that. So let's say we wanted to create a machine learning model that could differentiate between images of copperhead snakes and images of red rat snakes. So instead of inputting instructions that allows the computer to differentiate between these two, we would instead create a huge mass of images of copperhead snakes that were labeled copperhead snakes, and a huge mass of images of red rat snakes that were labeled red rat snakes. And then we would ask the system itself to learn to differentiate between the two and to create a statistical model that could do that. And then ideally, any image of a snake that we put into the system, it's going to classify that as the new image as a copperhead or a red rat snake. Okay. So we can begin to see how these ideas are being applied in our daily lives and how this technology is spreading. This idea of machine learning is not a particularly new technology or a new idea, but it is growing really rapidly today. And one question that I have is, why is that? Why is it growing so rapidly today? And what I would say is that first, we are currently producing lots and lots of data as we move through our lives. And machine learning requires lots and lots of data to train efficiently. So imagine all the data that you produce as you move through your life. Let's say you use a credit card. Maybe you drive through a traffic camera. Maybe we're producing data right now through this Zoom video. Maybe you search for something online. Maybe you wear an activity tracker. Maybe you open a smartphone with your face. We are producing lots and lots of data as we move through our lives. And inexpensive sensors and input devices are allowing computers to track that data, to collect that data. So we have the data that we need for machine learning to work. And then we also have the compute. So by compute, I mean innovations in chip design, network architecture, and cloud-based resources. Compute is in essence the processing power that we need to train these algorithms. I think this quote is pretty amazing. As of 2018, the compute was 300,000 times larger than it was in 2012. So this huge increase in compute is also leading to the drop in the cost of training machine learning algorithms, and therefore the dissemination of those algorithms in our society. Okay, but what does any of this have to do with designers? That's the question that we care about here. Why should we care about this technology? What does it have to do with us? And that's what I'm going to answer in this discussion. So first, I would suggest that machine learning needs us. This technology needs human-centered research methods. Designers are trained to seek a desired future or the right thing to design. We're designed to put human values and needs first. Data scientists, on the other hand, are trained to seek what can accurately be determined from the data at hand. So to better contrast the two, let's imagine that they're giving a dinner, that a designer and a data scientist is giving a dinner party. The data scientist would approach the menu by thinking first about the ingredients. So what's available, what's in season, what is economical. The designer, on the other hand, would look first to the visitors coming to the dinner. What did they particularly enjoy? What did they enjoy eating in the past? Did they have any allergies? What kind of mood are you trying to set through this event? I would put to you that we need to recognize these different disciplinary goals so that designers and data scientists are able to collaborate together. Otherwise, we're going to end up with lots of optimized meals that no one wants to eat and that may be particularly unhealthy for us. So machine learning needs our human values, but we can also design interesting things with this technology. So machine learning allows us to personalize our designs to a specific person in a specific context. So to use Liz Sanders' phrase, we can design things that are useful, usable, and desirable to a specific person in a specific context. So to give some examples of this, this is a project that some of the master's level students did with an automotive parts company here in the US. And the prompt for the project was that the company was very interested in integrating machine learning in their retail spaces in ethical ways that benefited their customers. So this is part of a larger project. This particular piece is a predictive maintenance app. So what this app does is it uses machine learning to predict, based on the make and model and year of your car, what automotive maintenance needs lie on the horizon, what will appear or emerge that you currently see no sign of. And the idea here is that the sales associate can have conversations with the customer around these upcoming maintenance needs. Now, this idea gets really interesting when you think about it in terms of healthcare. And this is a big topic in healthcare right now, predictive medicine. So medicine that uses this technology to predict illnesses before symptoms appear. And you can start to think about the interesting design challenges that raises. How do we design systems, for example, that would allow a patient to interrogate those predictive diagnoses, to understand them and understand how reliable or accurate they might be? Here's another design project using machine learning. This is a project by another graduate student here, Rachel Payne, in collaboration with the computer science department here at the university. This is an intelligent information hub for caretakers of kids with rare diseases. So their research found that if your child is diagnosed with a rare disease, the first thing that you do is you search online for information about it. And what you get when you do that is a lot of information that you're not emotionally ready to handle that actually prevents you from productively moving forward in treatment, things like end-of-life care. So the idea behind this project is that it will serve up to this user only the specific information that they need to productively respond to the illness that their child has at the particular stage that their child is experiencing. This is another example, not quite so admirable example. This is the fast food chain, the US fast food chain McDonald's. They have an intelligent digital menu system that will identify the user and then serve up items on their menu and create special deals just for that person based on their preferences, but also based on the larger context. So we know that you love the bacon, egg, cheese biscuit mixed with pancakes. And so we're going to create this special deal for you with those two items. And we're going to add in an iced coffee because it's very, very hot today. So making fast food even faster and more appealing, not a particularly great goal here. Okay, so the examples that I just showed are examples of the idea of anticipatory design. Anticipatory design is a user experience pattern in which an interface or design anticipates what the user will want before they ask for it. And this idea also you can begin to imagine applied to a lot of areas. Amazon is actually exploring patents for anticipatory shipping. So actually shipping items to someone before they request them. anticipating what they're going to want before they even request it. Here's a student project exploring this idea of anticipatory design and machine learning. This is a project for individuals with cochlear implants, so deaf, hard of hearing individuals. These students, this is created by some graduate students here as well. Their research found that if you have a cochlear implant, you're often left out of very important business conversations that happen in casual settings like restaurants that have very unpredictable noise levels. So working with IBM, they prototyped this wearable device that will track the environment that you're in. So you walk into a restaurant, it will analyze the restaurant based on the noise level, how many people are in the room, how big is the space, what time of day is it, how many people are you actually trying to interact with, and it will adjust the microphones of a cochlear implant using Bluetooth and bone conduction on the fly. And what's interesting about this project is there's a tap system so that the wearer of the device can easily provide feedback to the system so it can learn your preferences over time. And over time, it will anticipate how the microphones need to be set so that you can best hear in these different casual environments. So I talked a little bit about how machine learning, types of things that we can make with machine learning, and these things that we need to begin to think about, such as anticipatory design. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how machine learning is changing how humans relate to machines and how that affects what we might design. So there are two types of technology that are particularly interesting to think about in regard to this: natural language processing and image recognition. Natural language processing is technology that allows a computer to analyze human language, spoken and written language, and comprehend it. Image recognition allows a computer to recognize an image, a person, place, activity, motion in an image or a video. So these two things together allow humans to converse with computers in very natural ways, through speech, through gesture, through expression, through motion. I'm not going to talk about image recognition, but I am going to talk a little bit about natural language processing. This is a great quote by Sherry Turkle. Machines with voices have a particular power to make us feel understood. Humans have evolved over thousands of years to expect anything that speaks to them in a human language to be a human. And it turns out it's really difficult for us to overcome that. Researchers Clifford Noss and Scott Brave did study after study to try to understand if we could suppress our natural reactions to human language, the kind of cultural baggage that we bring to a conversation, the biases. And they found that indeed we cannot, even when the voice is very obviously an artificial or synthetic voice. And understanding this matters for us as designers because people are increasingly speaking to computers using natural language. In 2014, Facebook's Wobot was receiving 2 million conversations a week, and Amazon had sold 100 million Alexa devices. In 2020, hundreds of thousands of people were each sending around 70 messages a day to Replica, a personal AI companion. Microsoft Xiaoice, a popular social chatbot, has over 660 million users, primarily in China. So designers are creating these interfaces through which humans are speaking to machine, and we need to be aware of how complex these relationships we are creating are. We also need to think about issues like how might these kinds of relationships open humans up to manipulation? In whose interest are these kinds of relationships being formed? This is a quick little study that one of the grad students did to explore this idea of manipulation. In this study, when you speak to this bot in a way that it doesn't prefer, you use language that it doesn't understand or phrases that are phrased in a way that is difficult for it to process, you physically hurt it. So if you don't speak to it correctly, it gets a black eye or its arm breaks off. It's playing with this idea of manipulating your emotions in order to train you to speak to it properly. But we can't ignore. So you might say, well, let's not do it. Let's not speak to these machines. Let's not create these kinds of emotional relationships. But we can't ignore that we are social emotional creatures, and that if we really want to move forward with collaborating with machines, which I would suggest is a really powerful avenue of advancement, that we need to take into account social emotional relationships. This is a quote by Submaro Kambhampati, AI researcher. If we do not focus on creating machines with an adroit social emotional intelligence, we'll end up with computers that don't understand us and don't need us. But it's hard to create emotional relationships with machines that aren't annoying. This is an example that's often cited. This is Clippy, created by Microsoft in 1997. Everyone hated Clippy, a little peppy, smug virtual assistant, because the emotional relationship was off and it was exhausting. This is a project by design and technology studio Telart, working with Toyota's advanced design team. They were working to explore what kind of emotional relationships we might be forming with our cars in the future as our vehicles become these kinds of intelligent machines. Okay, now I'm going to talk briefly about something that is very near and dear to designers' hearts, not just how machine learning might change what we design, but how we design. Remember that I talked about these relationships, how natural language and image recognition can change the way humans converse or communicate with machines. Well, it can also change the way that designers communicate with their creative tools or use their creative tools. So imagine, for example, instead of clicking and dragging and all of this stuff, maybe you just tell your creative software what you want to do. Make the sky darker, add more white space, adjust the hierarchy, create more tension. And you can already begin to see the complexities of using language to communicate those things to creative software. But we can also begin to imagine how, if we began to use language and gesture, our creative software might begin to feel more of like an extension of ourselves. This is a project by Sharif Shamim. This is a tool that allows users to generate a fully functioning app just by describing it. You describe it, and it not only designs the app, but it creates the back-end code to make it functional. So maybe the very idea of creative tools will grow a bit irrelevant. It will feel like an extension of ourselves. How else will machine learning impact design practice? So Patrick Hebron, former director of machine intelligence at Adobe, suggests that we think of it in terms of scaffolding complexity. We will be able to use AI to design projects that are much bigger and more complex than we could ever imagine previously. He uses these two as examples. So the Florence Cathedral took 140 years from conception to completion. The Burj Khalifa took 5 years, a much more complex building. So we're beginning to see how AI is changing the scale and the complexity of what we're able to produce. Another quote by Hebron, that machine intelligence will enable creatives to do even more and think even bigger. One of the things that designers always suggest to me when we're thinking about this idea of how our creative process is changing is that AI might be able to produce many, many variations of something that we're trying to create, formal variations. This is not an old idea, goes way back. This is an example from 1964 from Carl Gerntzner's book, Designing Programs. Here he was thinking about breaking down the parameters of a logo, breaking all the attributes down into these parameters that a computer could then program and recombine to create lots of quick variations. Well, we do see this idea playing out today with machine learning, specifically in the form of generative adversarial networks, or GAN systems. What's very interesting about GAN systems is that they're generative. They create new data instances that resemble training data, but are not the training data. Artbreeder is a platform that allows designers to interact with this technology really easily, and there are other platforms out there. This is a project by a group of students led by Anastasia Reyna at the Rhode Island School of Art and Design. These images that you're seeing, these lovely images, these were generated by a GAN system. The students trained the system on 2,000 images of multiple marine invertebrate zooplanktons. And then the GAN system generated new images that resembled the originals, but were unique. So bringing this AI perspective to form is a really interesting area as well. Machine learning researcher Janelle Shane suggests that working with AI is a lot less like working with another human and a lot more like working with some weird force of nature. She gives the example of a project by David Ha at Google Brain. He asked a computer, a AI system, to create a robot from some parts that he gave it, the most efficient robot to get from point A to point B. But instead of doing what he expected, the AI system simply piled the pieces of the robot into a long tower that could just fall over and hit point B, a completely different perspective on getting from one place to another. So Patrick Hebron suggested if we want human thinking, we should probably go to humans for it. There are a lot of them. But if we want this kind of different perspectives on our process and our creative process and the problems that we're trying to solve, this is where working with AI can get really interesting in terms of form and problem solving. But I would caution that AI has no understanding of human consequences. And this is another quote by Janelle Shane, that humans bring that conversation, bring that understanding to the process. So I would put to you that there's so many interesting possibilities around this technology with design, but we do have to be really aware of the dangers as well. I mentioned manipulation. There are also issues around privacy, around surveillance, around bias in these systems, and that bias impacting marginalized individuals on a large scale. So this is also an issue that we as designers need to be aware of and be digging into. And there are a lot of great designers doing work in this area. So for example, Joy Buolamwini founded the Algorithmic Justice League at MIT to fight bias in facial recognition systems based on gender and skin tone. Just going to flip through some designers doing interesting work in this space. Sarah Gold at the Studio IF in the UK, really taking on how designers can address ethical issues around collecting and using people's data. How do we design systems that empower people to question this? Stephanie Yee and Tony Chu, founders of R2D3, creating really high impact interactive visualizations of how machine learning works so that the average person can understand these systems better. Mimi Oniowa and Diana Nucera creating zines, really simple beginner's guides to artificial intelligence that they can distribute to marginalized communities and help educate people so that they can question these systems and advocate for themselves. So I want to make clear that I'm very excited about the potential of the technology, but I'm also very cautious about the problems that it brings to our societies and our responsibilities as designers to not only understand the capabilities and possibilities of these systems, but also the dangers of these systems so that we can address them responsibly in our work. Because we can let machine learning prey on those that our society already victimizes, or we can really use the technology as a mechanism for equity and justice. We should never trust a technology that has no true understanding of human consequences to take the lead. We need to take the lead. And I would end with, I would encourage all designers not to let this technology intimidate you, because the technology needs your skills as designers as we move forward. I do have a new book out on this topic, Big Data, Big Design, that goes more deeply into some of the things that I touched on today. So if you're interested, check that out. With that, I'll conclude and I'll look forward to the Q&A.
Yes, thank you for the lovely presentation, Helen. I also lately realized that forgot to mention your most recent book, Big Data, Big Design, and make a little note to myself that also mentioned that book, but you mentioned yourself. Thank you. So I have a question for you, but at this time, maybe our attendees may write their questions, since writing also takes some time, that we are expecting questions. And now, as a lecturer, as an academic, I am really struggling in some point. I am very aware of, this is obvious, that the data is the new raw material, and computational design, algorithmic thinking, computational thinking is the new technical language that we have to adopt. I am also in my own productions trying to use them, trying to utilize them, but still we have somehow old communication design curriculum. So how should we adapt the current somehow old visual communication design curriculum? I am also wondering the approach in United States universities. Shall we start teaching statistics, mathematics, coding from the first grade? And if yes, if this is the solution, which current lessons shall we drop? Since it is not possible to fit everything now in four-year curriculum, it seems like with machine learning data and algorithms now, a designer should be like a Swiss Army knife to know everything. So what do you say about that?
Okay, so the questions that you're asking, those are everyone's struggling with those questions, right? All over. The industry is changing so quickly and we're trying to keep up with it. We always feel like we're behind, and that's not just us as educators. I feel like everyone in industry feels the same way that I talk to. So if you feel behind and like you're not gonna, how can I catch up with all this? Everyone else feels the same way too. So that's first, I think it's important to say that. Second, I would say that I do think that statistics are increasingly important for students to understand, not just designers, but in every area, because statistics are determining so much of our lives, what kind of loans we qualify, job interviews are being often conducted or at least here, they're starting to be conducted by AI systems. And so if you don't understand how those systems work, biases will definitely work against you. So understanding statistics is really important, I do think. That said, I agree. You can't learn everything, right? I do encourage my students to take introductory statistics courses at the university. We don't offer them in our design curriculum, but encourage them to do that because that's something the university offers that I can point them to.
So it is a general, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It is a general lecture, like 101 for everyone.
Yeah,
so
like 101. I don't think they need to become super, super sophisticated, but just a 101, how does statistics work? I think that's really useful for designers right now, for design students to take. Now, in terms of the traditional communication curriculum, as we are transitioning toward teaching digital interfaces, and that's, I would say too, if you are an amazing print designer, you can also become an amazing digital interface designer. Yes, you're having to think a bit differently, but all those wonderful foundational skills that you understand so well around establishing hierarchy and creating an experience that unfolds, or allowing an experience to unfold as someone's able to comprehend the experience, grid systems, all those things that we all know really well from our past and our experience, all those things apply to digital interfaces as well. And if you can teach students to design a digital interface, then you can definitely start thinking about some of these issues around machine learning. How is the interface allowing someone to understand what they're doing? Like, what information is it giving them so that they understand what's happening behind the scenes? Because a lot of these issues with machine learning have to do with the technology is invisible. We don't see it happening. Decisions are being made, predictions are being made that then affect the humans using the systems, but we don't understand how the decisions are being made. And we don't understand what data is being gathered from us. So making those invisible things visible through our designs is really powerful. And I do think that is something that we can take on in our classrooms. I mentioned Sarah Gold in the UK at that studio. If she has some really interesting user experience interaction patterns, like really simple patterns to help empower people, to incorporate into user interface designs to help empower people to ask questions or say no to things as things are unfolding. So there are great designers doing work that we can look to as well. I do think some things have to be cut from curriculums. We're struggling with that right now at my university. We're going through our undergraduate curriculum, and it's very difficult to know. I would say that I think there's also a lot of interesting work being done in typography right now, and thinking about intelligent typography that can respond to a user's needs. So I think typography is still super important in curriculums, but maybe thinking about it more in a digital space. As I said, we're struggling with this too. We have to do everything now, and it's very difficult to fit it into the time that the students have. But also really exciting time because there's so many things that they can explore and develop.
So I have to say I'm selfishly relieved that we are not only struggling because US is the flagship of such kind of things, that if you are also struggling, that we can catch up fast. So so you're not suggesting like a very specifically for the communication department, like the statistics for design or mathematics for design or coding for design, such kind of very specific special classes, but the general 101 is also going to be sufficient.
I think the general 101, maybe 101 and 102, the first two, is incredibly useful for designers. I mean, it would be wonderful to have a course that was statistics and design or something like that. I think that we do have to, I think if students can understand the capabilities of machine learning. So I personally would rather see a class called something like AI and design. And I teach classes like that, where I'm really teaching the students the capabilities of the technology so they can incorporate it into their work. They may not have a deep understanding of the back end of the technology. They have a very basic understanding of the statistics. But then we partner with data scientists who do have that kind of deep understanding.
Multidisciplinary approach.
Yes. So I would say I do think that, and that's something we're looking at in our undergraduate curriculum. How can we, as often as possible, collaborate with other disciplines, because the projects have become so complex in industry. They're going to have to do that. And so the more that we can do that in school, the better they'll be prepared when they get out into the world.
Yes, for sure. We have a question from our head of department of the cinema. What so you think about the AI representation in cinema? Are they exaggerated or realistic? Are they asking the right questions about the technology or just fiction? It was not the main theme of the speech, but the question just came in my mind.
No, that's a great question. So it's interesting you bring that up. So sometimes I think a lot of the questions that are raised are very interesting in cinema. Often, yes, it's not realistic to what we can do today, but cinema does have an incredible effect on the way that we envision the future of the technology, and therefore the way that we begin to create it. So it is affecting the future of AI greatly, because it affects our vision, right? Begins to affect our vision. So that's the way we imagine it. So that's the way we start building it. So there is a real back and forth there. I do have my students look at clips of AI in cinema, and we have critical discussions around it, because it also does reveal a lot around the fears that we have, valid or invalid, and the hope that we have for the technology. So I think cinema is really useful.
Thank you. And we have also a question from the yesterday's keynote speaker, Christine Sprengler. What do you think is the most pressing ethical consideration moving forward with machine learning or AI applications to design?
So there are many pressing ethical problems. Bias is a huge, huge problem right now because these systems are often biased against those in our society that have the least amount of power. And giving individuals tools to combat that is really important. So, for example, some of our students did a project with a company called SAS last semester, and the project was around how do you design an interface so that a data scientist who are building these models has a clear understanding of what bias they're putting into these systems. How do you visualize bias so that the people building them can understand them? And I think that plays out for people, average people using these systems too. If we're using a system, how do we understand what's happening? How is it visualized for us? How do the interactions actually make what's happening clearer rather than make it bury it in the past? So I think visualizing how these systems are working is so that we can understand when bias is occurring is one of a huge ethical issue right now that we as designers are addressing. I'll mention one more though, real quick. So I think that's the most pressing, but another issue that I find particularly interesting that I didn't talk about in my lecture was the idea of de-skilling. Every time we add features to some kind of interactive platform or tool, every time we automate something, we are making a decision that we're taking that skill away from a human and giving it to a machine instead. That's no longer valuable for humans to have. So I think thinking very critically about what skills we take away and what skills we instead reinforce is also another issue right now.
We have a curious question from Erdal Kemeroğlu. Do you predict that likelihood of artificial intelligence becoming depressed?
So that's a very good question. I think that, and you know, so I'm going to get to my answer in a little bit of a roundabout way. Kate Darling is a researcher at MIT that's done really interesting work around the way people respond to robots and how robots can create empathy in people and how complex those kinds of relationships begin to be. Now, in her work, the robots have no sense of self, right? So it's more about humans projecting things on the robots and then responding to it. So far, at this point, we feel pretty far from general artificial intelligence, the kind of artificial intelligence that could actually experience emotions like depression. Of course, there's all kinds of debates. There are people who would suggest that the minute that we do achieve that we'll jump straight into super intelligence and then we'll all be irrelevant. And there's all kinds of, thinking in that area. But at this moment in time, I would say the danger is less about the AI actually feeling depressed and more about the human projecting that the AI is feeling depressed and then being manipulated by our feelings around that. So, we think that Alexa is depressed because of something we said, and then Amazon is manipulating us into taking certain actions because we have these emotional reactions. So I think that's the bigger issue for us right now.
Yes. So I shall not forget that Dr. Çetin Türker say hello to you. He couldn't be here, but he was the connection that we reached to you. So I have to deliver that. And
yes, that's great. Thank you.
And so I guess we are at the end of our presentation. And I would like to thank Professor Helen Armstrong for her mind-opening presentation. So luckily, we finalized our online symposium without any obstacles or technical issues. And I may continue in Turkish, and Helen, you may pass the translation, maybe. Evet, sempozyumumuzun sonuna geldik. Bir duyuru yapmak istiyorum. Hasip hocamız yarın saat 11 ile 16, yani öğleden sonra 4 arasında Altunizade'de bulunan İstanbul Ekslibris Müzesi'nde katılmamızı bekliyor müze turu için. Evet ve sözü dekanımız Profesör Doktor Peyami Çelikcan'a bırakabilirim. Dekanımız buradaysa sempozyumumuzu finalize etmek için.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Helen Armstrong. It was a very informative and impressive presentation for us. You introduced the new concepts in design, specifically focusing on the data. Data is one of the key words we had heard about during these 2 days. We started talking about digitalization and the visual studies, but we heard mostly the term of data. So data is becoming one of the most important key words for designers and also for the researchers in the field of communication and media studies. I will also switch to Turkish to end up the panel discussion, if you don't mind, Helen. The translation is available. Okay. Değerli katılımcılar, konuşmacılar, 2 günlük uzun bir maratonun sonuna geldik ve bu maraton içerisinde başlangıçta planladığımız şekilde dijitalleşme ve görsel çalışmalar alanındaki güncel gelişmeleri, güncel sorunları, güncel araştırmaları sizlerle paylaşma fırsatı elde ettik. Bu tür sempozyumlar, akademik buluşmalar her birimiz için başkaları, diğer akademisyenler neler yapıyor, meslektaşlarımız neler yapıyor, hangi konular üzerine çalışıyor, hangi sorunları araştırma konusu yapıyor. Bu konularda bize güncel bilgi sunuyor. Ve bu tür organizasyonlara katılmak suretiyle bizler de gelecek çalışmalarımızı, araştırmalarımızı planlayacak yeni fikirler, yeni akademik sorunlar ediniyoruz. Bu bakımdan her halükarda bu tür organizasyonların devam etmesi çok önemli. Biz bu sempozyumu düzenleme çalışmaları başlattığımızda korona ile ilgili kısıtlamalar halen devam ediyordu ve 1 sene sonra ne olacağı konusunda önümüzü göremiyorduk. Bu bakımdan sürüncemede bırakmamak adına biz online olarak bu sempozyumu gerçekleştirmeyi planladık. Ama gelişmeler olumlu seyretti ve aslında böylesi bir organizasyonu yüz yüze de yapabileceğimiz bir yeni ortam oluşmuş oldu. Ama 1 yıl önceden bunu öngörebilmemiz, sonra da değişiklik yapmamız mümkün değildi. Diliyoruz ki önümüzdeki yıl bu sempozyumun 3.'sünü İstanbul'da İstinye Üniversitesi'nin Topkapı ve Vadi kampüsünde bir araya gelerek yüz yüze daha güçlü bir etkileşim ortamına dönüştürelim. Bizim yine bu sempozyumla ilgili olarak başlangıçtaki hedefimiz hep şu oldu. Biz iletişim fakültesi olarak Türkiye'de en son açılmış en yeni iletişim fakültesiyiz. Ve dolayısıyla bir yandan kat etmemiz gereken çok büyük bir yol var, uzun bir mücadele dönemi var. Ama bir yandan da en yeni olmanın, en genç olmanın, en son olmanın da avantajları var. Bu bakımdan biz İstinye Üniversitesi İletişim Fakültesi'ni 21. yüzyılın temel gelişmelerini takip edecek şekilde dijital odaklı bir fakülte yapılanmasına göre planladık. Ve yaptığımız bütün faaliyetleri de dijitalleşme odaklı sürdürme kararlılığı içerisindeyiz. Tabii dijitalleşme ana odaklarımızdan birisi olunca çalışma alanlarımızı da genişletmek, yeniden gözden geçirmek durumunda kaldık. Bu bakımdan özellikle tasarım çalışmalarımızın ana odaklarından bir diğerini oluşturdu. Klasik anlamdaki bir iletişim eğitimini tasarım odaklı bir eğitimle daha da geliştirmek, farklılaştırmak gibi bir misyonu da yüklendi. Bu bakımdan dikkat ederseniz sempozyumumuzda sadece araştırma sonuçlarını içeren bildiriler değil, aynı zamanda yaratıcı çalışmalara yer veren sergiler, atölyeler gibi başka etkinlikleri de sempozyum kapsamına aldık. Bu yönüyle de sempozyumu geliştirerek önümüzdeki yıllarda bu tür farklı disiplinlere yer veren, farklı çalışmalara, farklı çıktılara yer veren, fırsat sunan bir akademik platform haline getirmeye çalışıyoruz. Bu anlamda bizim bu çabalarımıza destek olan, yurt içinden ve yurt dışından aramıza katılan, konuşmacı olarak, atölye yöneticisi olarak, sergi küratörü olarak aramıza katılan bütün değerli misafirlerimize çok teşekkür ediyorum. Bu destekleri bizim için çok kıymetli. Bu yıl elde ettiğimiz bu sonuç, katılımcılarımızın sunumları, yapılan tartışmalar, paylaşılan çalışmalar bize önümüzdeki yıllar için çok daha büyük bir güç verdi. Dolayısıyla bu sıradan bir güç değil, bizim moral ve motivasyonumuzu arttıran çok kıymetli, çok değerli, özel bir destek anlamı taşıyor İletişim Fakültesi kadrosu açısından. Tabii bu vesileyle kapanış konuşmasında ben bu güzel 2 günlük etkinliği hazırlayan ama bu etkinliğin bu şekilde sonuçlanması için aylar boyu çok yoğun bir mesai harcayan değerli çalışma arkadaşlarıma çok teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Onların yoğun çabaları olmasa bu sempozyumu gerçekleştirme imkanımız elbette ki olmayacaktı. Her organizasyonda olduğu gibi bu organizasyonda bugün bütün bu oturumlarda aynı zamanda dinleyici olarak, görevli olarak da aramızda bulunan bütün değerli hocalarımıza, asistan arkadaşlarımıza, üniversitemizin ilgili idari birimlerine, hepsine teşekkür ediyoruz. Ve tabii ki dinleyici olarak aramıza katılan öğrencilerimize, farklı üniversitelerden, yurt içinden ve yurt dışından panellere katılan, görüşleriyle, sorularıyla katkıda bulunan bütün araştırmacılara, meslektaşlarımıza da ayrıca müteşekkirim. Bu duygu ve düşüncelerle bir İletişim Fakültesi'nin bütün kadrosunu içine alacak şekilde oluşturduğumuz düzenleme kurulundaki bütün arkadaşlarımıza emekleri için teşekkür ediyorum. Bu bir ekip çalışmasıyla mümkün oluyor. Ekiplerle büyük işler yapıyor. Büyük işlerle ekipler büyüyor. Bizler de ekibimizi giderek büyüyerek, güçlendirerek, deneyim kazandırarak önümüzdeki sempozyumları daha güçlü bir şekilde sizlere sunmuş olacağız. Hepinize bu duygularla teşekkür ediyor ve iyi akşamlar diliyorum. Katılımlarınız için tekrar ayrıca müteşekkir olduğumu da ifade edeyim. So this is the end of the session, symposium. Have a nice night. Thank you for joining us during these 2 days. And hope to see you next year. And Dr. Armstrong, say hello to United States, American people from Turkey.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope to see you next year.